This summer brought us the start of Universal Studios' Dark Universe with The Mummy, a reimagining of this classic movie monster that is meant to set up a shared universe between all these classic characters, and the film was universally agreed upon by critics and audiences to be an absolute piece of crap that no one wanted to spend their money on. So it looks like this Dark Universe is DOA. There's no way they're going to continue on with this massive flop, especially considering that this is the second time they've attempted to build a cinematic universe, and the first one failed just as bad, if not worse, meaning this is probably the last we'll hear about the Universal Monsters shared cinematic universe. Is what I would like to say if it weren't for the foreign box office. Damn you, rest of the world! America is supposed to be the king of bad taste in movies. What happened to us? Okay, so maybe they'll continue it, maybe they'll reboot again, but if we have to sit through any more of these shared cinematic universe monsters movies, I'll be damned if I'm going to sit back and not try and help. Yes, you see, I've noticed a trend on YouTube recently of people coming in and pitching their versions of movies, such as What Culture's How They Should Have Made, Belated Media's What If the Prequels Were Good, and Movie Bob's How Bob Would Fix series. Heck, I even tested the waters myself on our comic book show where I pitched how I'd relaunch Marvel Comics. So, if that is the way that the wind is blowing, let it not be said that I don't also blow. So today, I'm starting a brand new series called Pitching In, where I pitch to you what I would do if I had control over these franchises. And as a horror movie fan, and in honor of Halloween, I have to start with the Universal Monsters. Now, I'm going to begin my pitch with the big question. Do we keep the current universe, or scrap it for a second time to start a third, fresh reboot? This one is a no-brainer to me. Scrap it. Because yes, audiences might roll their eyes at any more attempts to set up this universe, but they're already going to do that anyway with this franchise, so let's at least try and start it right. And you might say, but the current universe did well overseas. Yes, The Mummy did do well overseas, but not because it was The Mummy. Not because people in Asia were really excited about these American monsters coming back again. It did well because of Tom Cruise. He's a big draw over there. That's what did it, and that's what brings us to the big problem with this current Dark Universe. Tom Cruise isn't going to be in every single one of these movies. Johnny Depp still has some legs overseas, but China isn't going to line up for a Javier Bardem Frankenstein movie. So if you're holding on to this universe in the hopes that it'll keep succeeding overseas, that's not a smart gamble. But also, Tom Cruise should not be the face of this franchise. I know they picked him because they won their own Robert Downey Jr., but for this franchise, you don't want a Robert Downey Jr. as the star, because actors like that aren't horror stars. And that's the first change we have to make in this third attempt. First attempt at their monster universe was a fantasy epic blockbuster theme. Second attempt at their monster universe was an action superhero-y blockbuster theme. So for this third attempt at this monster universe, how about, I don't know, a horror theme? You want to bring back the magic of the old Universal monster movies? Awesome, great, but nobody came out of the 1932 Mummy films saying, my favorite part was when they ran from the explosion. Nobody saw the 1941 Wolfman and said, needed more car chases. No, they said, that was scary, because they were horror movies. So that's what we're going to bring back. And honestly, this is the smartest choice for this universe because Marvel has got the action summer blockbuster shared universe down tight, but DC is also going for that same thing, and now the Hasbro properties are going to try and do it too. Everyone is going to try and make their own big action blockbuster shared universe. If you want to make your shared universe stand out, if you want people to actually care, you have to try something different. And nobody has done the horror shared universe yet. And you'd better do it now because those Conjuring films are trying to beat you to it. And I know what you might be thinking. Nobody does big budget horror blockbusters. They never succeed. Why would this big budget horror blockbuster succeed? Simple. It's not going to be one. Yes, Horror tends to work best with a lower budget, and for many reasons. Lower budgets typically force the writers and directors to be more creative with the scares. Horror tends to work best when they show you very little, and big budget films are made to show you everything. Bigger budget films lend themselves to action, and it's hard to build suspense and dread when stuff is constantly blowing up. I could keep going, but the point is, you don't need a $150 million Mummy film. Not to mention, this is the third time we've tried to relaunch this monster universe. You think the studio is going to give you that big of a budget? And hey, I said we weren't going to worry about the foreign box office anymore, so that's another reason for a smaller budget. With a smaller budget, you can just have a mildly successful film and you'll still bring in a profit. Have you ever wondered why we're up to a dozen different Halloween films? Or why they kept making Paranormal Activity after Paranormal Activity for so many years in a row? Is it because they were really good movies? God no! It was because you could film them for pocket change. So okay, they're going to be small budget horror movies, but who are you going to get to star in them? Nobody. Well, nobody famous at least. You see, horror again works best when you don't know the actors. It helps to increase your level of immersion. If you can look at the screen and see a big name actor up there, it makes you realize you're watching a movie. So we're going to go with all unknown actors because of that, but also because they would work for a smaller budget, and as I said, we're trying to stick to that. But also because the star of these films shouldn't be the actors. They should be the monsters. I don't want to go to The Mummy to see Tom Cruise. I want to go to The Mummy to see The Mummy. And that's not to say that we won't have star power. We're just going to have horror star power. Because in the horror world, actors are nice, but the celebrities we go nuts for are the directors, the writers, the creators. So that's why rather than trying to win over celebrities to star in this movie, we're going to use all of our charisma and budget and aim it directly at the army of talented young horror filmmakers popping up today. And honestly, this is the best opportunity for that we've ever had, because currently we are living in a golden era of young, hip, indie, and low-budget horror filmmakers, each of whom have proven that they have unique visions and have built up their own dedicated fan base. And because of that, if you picked any of these directors to work on one of these movies, these horror fanatics would perk up and say, oh wow, that's an interesting choice. But if one of these directors on one of these films would perk up this audience, then picking 7 of them for 7 movies would blow that audience's mind. The horror community would have to take all that cynicism and naysaying and pack it away, because at that point, with 7 hip young horror directors on board, even the grumpiest film critic would have to look at that and say, wait, could this actually possibly be good? But who to pick? And what movies to put them on? And what order should these movies be arranged? Well, this is how I would do it, but again, this is just my own personal list. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below who you would assign to each of these different movies. As I said, we currently live in a vast landscape of talented indie and low-budget horror directors, so you could really pick any of them and you'd be able to come up with something unique. I mean, heck, you couldn't do worse than Universal did. Those guys put in charge of their movies the people behind Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Transformers, which, yes, were indeed scary, but not for the reasons you want a movie to be scary. So if I had to be put in charge of this monster universe, this is who I would assign to each of these movies and what order I would arrange the films in order to set up this universe. Now, for the first movie, we need something different. Something that sets it aside from the other Universal monsters, so that way audiences won't instantly be reminded of the crap show that was Universal's previous 2 attempts. But also because you don't want to go in there too strong. Dracula, Mummy, Frankenstein, those are your big guns. You want to save them for later. Start with something smaller, something that won't feel like it has to be tied to a bigger universe, so audiences won't feel like they're entering into a commitment when they go to see this film. So for our first film, I'm casting my vote for Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's got a fan base, he's always been a favorite among horror movie fans and general audiences alike, and he's incredibly recognizable. But despite all that, he's actually had the fewest movies out of any of the Universal monsters, with only 3 solo films and a guest appearance in Monster Squad. Yeah, that's it. Whenever you think of the Universal monsters, he's there. He's one of the major players. He appears in all the merchandise just like all the other monsters do, but he's only had 3 movies. Dracula gets a brand new film every couple of years. The Mummy had a beloved trilogy or quad trilogy. Geez, how many of those were there? And there's more Wolfman coming out than you can shake a stick at, but the creature hasn't had a new movie since 1956. So not only would you get people's attention by bringing back a character who hasn't been used in forever, you'd also have younger audiences who probably never even heard of the creature looking at him like he was something brand new. But who to put in charge of it? Remember, this is who we're kicking our universe off with, so we need a big name to bring in an audience who isn't just attracted to the idea of a giant fish man. So to tackle the creature, I'm going to pick Matt and Ross Duffer. Oh, you don't know who they are? Well, you might be more familiar with them by their other name, the guys who created Stranger Things. And yes, that's not an actual name, but it is what we're going to call them on the poster. Now I know someone out there is going to say, hey, you said that you were getting indie and low-budget horror directors. They did a TV show on Netflix. That's not an indie movie. Calm down, I'm getting to that. Yes, they're not exactly indie horror movie directors, but Stranger Things certainly captured a very creepy, chilling tone, so they got the horror aspect down. And I'm picking the indie horror movie directors so that way you can win over and impress the horror fans out there. But again, this is the first film in the series. You need someone with some mainstream appeal, and to me, Stranger Things is that one phenomenon that appeals to both mainstream audiences and the fringe horror fans. Plus, Stranger Things is a worldwide phenomenon. Everyone loves that series, and this would be the first major movie from the creators of that show, so that alone would get a lot of people to overlook our past couple, let's call them mistakes, and start buying their tickets now. Not to mention, they would be a perfect fit for the creature from the Black Lagoon. Did you see Stranger Things? Remember when they went to the Upside Down world? Yeah, that's the swamp. And it's always been a part of the creature's mythos that he was created by a mysterious company polluting the swamp. Gee, a story about an evil organization that created a nightmare creature by tampering with the fabric of the world, who also did something just like that. Oh right, the exact guys who I picked. Plus, setting this story inside of a secret lab would give you the opportunity to put a few Easter eggs in there. Not blatant ones where they just stop the whole movie to point them out like they did in The Mummy, but maybe on a door in the lab there's the name of a scientist who ends up becoming the Invisible Man. Maybe there's a map of Transylvania in a boardroom. Heck, you could even have someone reading through a textbook that was written by Dr. Frankenstein. Small stuff like that the movie wouldn't stop the focus on, but to the people willing to go back and freeze frame on, it would be a little treat that would hint at future plans for this universe. But that's just the start. What's next? Is it time to move on to the big guns? No. As I said, this is going to be a slow burn. We want our viewers to not even realize that we're building something until about movie 3 or 4. We want this to be a thing where they realize halfway through a movie as they're sitting in the theater, oh my god, it's a franchise. Plus, as I said, Universal has screwed over pretty much every single one of its major characters at this point, and I think audiences need a little bit more time to heal. So the next one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and for this one, I'm picking Jennifer Kent, the director of The Babadook. Now, one big change between this Mr. Hyde and the last incarnation of the character is that he's not going to be Nick Fury. Geez, what was wrong with you, Universal? Why did you think that was a good idea? But also, this won't be a big budget action film. The Babadook worked wonderfully because it focused on a woman slowly dealing with the demons inside her own head as this monster, the Babadook, was inching its way into her home, only to leave audiences wondering, was the Babadook real or was it just a figment of her imagination, a metaphor for everything that she was dealing with? That's what we're going to do with Jekyll and Hyde. This movie will try to be the story of someone dealing with their inner demons, made even more horrifying when those demons are made real, when they fully take over the protagonist. This will be less a monster movie and more of a psychological thriller that just happens to star a monster. Okay, now we've got two movies under our belt. One a more classic monster, but not really a household name and not really tying into anything larger just yet, and a smaller, more personal monster story that is completely self-contained. We've got audiences intrigued, but we haven't come on too strong. Now it's time to apply some pressure. Time to bring out something bigger, so I'm going to unleash Frankenstein. However, we're not doing some modern adaptation. We're not making a cool, updated Frankenstein. We're sticking with the old school classic Frankenstein, and I mean old school. If Marvel and DC have taught us anything, at least one movie in your shared universe should take place in the past. So we're going to go back in time to the 1700s, the time when the original Frankenstein was set, and we're going to get Robert Eggers, director of The Witch, to tackle this one. I love The Witch because it showed how frightening monsters were hundreds of years ago, especially when you were isolated from the rest of the world. However, we have seen that Frankenstein story before, so we have to do something different with it. And what I propose for this is that we focus on someone completely different. All the previous Frankenstein stories have either focused on Dr. Frankenstein or his monster. So imagine for this Frankenstein, rather than following the doctor as we watch him build this creature and we go through every step of his plan, we follow the villagers who have no idea that this is happening. They only keep hearing strange stories about this madman who lives in a castle on the edge of town. But slowly, bodies start going missing from the graveyards. People are being abducted in the night, and our protagonist, a simple man who just wants to work at the local mill and raise his family, begins to worry about what might happen to his children, all leading up to his daughter being found dead in the river. He then goes to investigate for himself what is happening at this doctor's castle, only to discover this monster. Our hero is hunted by the walking abomination and has to get the other villagers to fight back, but as he leads them with pitchforks and torches to kill the beast, he then realizes this creature is not a monster at all, just another victim of Dr. Frankenstein's evil. But it's too late. He has to watch on as this monster perishes in the flames, and he realizes that in the end, it was man who was the true monster. This is the approach that I would take with this film because, as I said, we have seen Frankenstein from many different perspectives. We've never seen it from the mob's point of view. And honestly, I think that taking someone who leads the charge against Frankenstein only to realize Frankenstein was not the true monster would lead to some great character development. And also, as I said, you want this to be a horror story. Watching the doctor create this monster, not really that horrifying. Watching the villagers have to see strange things happening in their town and some big lumbering figure off in the night, that can actually be scary. Okay, now we're starting to get into the big guns, but we don't want to go through them too quickly. We don't want to race through each of them all at once, so before we really dive deep, I'd say we do one last small isolated film before we really get into our all-stars. So for this final isolated small film, I'm going to pitch The Phantom of the Opera. I know it doesn't sound like a major character, but I think in the right hands, you can turn the Phantom from a tragic, lonely, disfigured musician into a truly disturbing slasher. And my contender for this film is Adam Wingard, the man behind You're Next and the recent Blair Witch film. Now, in You're Next, it followed a fairly snobbish group that were being hunted by a killer, and this movie is set in an opera house, so you know there'd be some similar characters, but the main reason I'm picking him for this movie is because while the Blair Witch had its problems, the big scene-stealing moment for that film is when they go into the house at the end of that movie. That house was the MVP of that film. And The Phantom would be a movie about people sneaking into a haunted, decaying remains of an opera house as they're hunted by a monster. And Wingard has proven that's kind of his bread and butter. Hell, even in the pee-poor Death Note movie he directed, the best part of that whole film is when they go to the abandoned orphanage. That sequence was legitimately scary, so change that from an orphanage to an opera house and make it the whole movie, and you've got yourself a film. Alright, into the final three, and by this point, people have realized we have ourselves a franchise. They're all connected. There's no point in trying to continue to hide this, so let's go big. And you can't get much bigger with your monsters than Dracula. Now, I saw Dracula Untold, their attempt to turn Dracula into a superhero, and it was awful. Not just as a film, but also just as an interpretation of Dracula. I mean, they tried to make Dracula a sympathetic hero who only did bad things to make more good. That's almost insulting to your audience. We know who Dracula is. He's the Prince of Darkness. He's the most evil monster to have ever lived. Don't try and make him a hero. However, I will admit, that movie gave us an origin to Dracula, and honestly, I think that's kind of an interesting idea. We never really asked, how did Dracula become a vampire? So I say, for this Dracula movie, just to fully clear up this is not that old Dracula, let's do the origin story again, but this time we realize what we're doing. We're building him up to be the most evil monster the world has ever known. Dracula is meant to be the big villain of the entire monster shared universe, so rather than just having him pop up from film to film, we are now going to give him an entire movie just to show how evil he is. We are going to have an entire movie building up what kind of a threat this character can be. Let's see him born alone, parents dead, a street rat who grew up wanting nothing more than to take revenge on the world that spat on him and looked down on him. He's forced into the military as a slave, where he spends every moment trying to kill his captors and turning himself into a bloodthirsty beast on the battlefield until the day when he finally dies, only to be revived as a servant of darkness. We see him become the first vampire, a brand new breed of terror, and from there, he just seeks out revenge on everyone and anyone he has ever come across. You should see that Dracula had a rough life, but at no point should we feel sorry for him. We should always look at him like he's destined for evil. So when he starts chasing down those who tormented him, we should be on his side for about half a second before we see how sick and twisted he is. We should become afraid for the people he's chasing and everyone else in their way as he tears into them in the most gruesome ways imaginable, ripping into them with his teeth, slicing them apart with his claws. He's almost more animal than man in the beginning. Think of him less like the suave, debonair Dracula that we got in later films, and more like Nosferatu, where he almost looks like a vermin in human flesh. Slowly, we would watch him gain more control of himself as he starts using his newfound powers to enslave others the way that he was, all leading up to him laying waste to the entire town until he is left alone in his castle, ruler of the graveyard he has created. Now, as I said, this would be our first time to really try and go big. All the other films would be smaller, and that's why I was picking more independent guys who were known for working with smaller budgets. But since we are going big with this one, I want to pick a director who has shown that he can do horror, but at the same time has proven he can also do really big shared universe films. So I'm going to pick Scott Derrickson, who showed he knows how to do horror on Sinister, but also he was the director behind Doctor Strange, which shows that he knows how to play ball when it comes to these giant shared universe movies, but he can also get really weird and trippy and freaky with it. So I would love to see what he could do with that Doctor Strange level imagination, but with a vision like he had on Sinister. Next up is the Wolfman, and I'm going with Jordan Peele, who did an amazing job on Get Out earlier this year. I'm picking him because monsters have often been used as a form of social commentary, and Get Out used horror for social commentary better than any other movie I've seen this year. So I wanted to put him on one of these movies, and I feel like Wolfman is the most open to interpretation. I feel like with most classic monsters, there are a couple of rules that you have to stick to. There are a couple of parts about their origin story that you have to continue to obey. But when it comes to the Wolfman, all that matters is the Wolfman. When it comes to his human side, you can create anything you want with that. You can create a brand new character, give him a completely different backstory from any other Wolfman, because it's the curse of turning into a Wolfman that ties all these characters together. Who they are as a human is completely up to you, and you are totally allowed to create something new with it. So when it comes to the Wolfman film, the director we have to pick for that is the person who we have to be able to trust to just hand the keys to and back away and say, do whatever you want with it. And Jordan Peele has proven to me he's the guy I would most trust just giving complete control over this character. And lastly, I'm putting James Wan on Hellsing. Yes, that's right, the 7th film that we're doing in this wave 1 of monster films is Hellsing, and the reason we're making it the final film is because I feel like the problem that all these other Universal Monster shared universe attempts have had is that, where are they heading? What is all of this leading towards? If you're going to make a shared universe, there has to be an end game, there has to be an arc, there has to be something that ties it all together, and right now, I have no idea where the Dark Universe is going. But ours is heading towards Van Helsing, the legendary monster hunter, because after 6 movies of watching monsters terrorize and rip through humans, this would be the film when the human stands up and decides it's time to start fighting back. It would have been earned at this point. At this point, we would have seen so many evil creatures rising up and striking down humans. Yeah, we kind of want to see one of them be able to fight on their level. In fact, we could even have him and his ancestors popping up as the post-credit stingers for all these films like Thanos is in the Avengers, except that with Thanos, they're building up a villain with every single one of these films, but in ours, we're building up a hero. Now we all know the story of Van Helsing is that he was famous for hunting down Dracula, and that's why I said we needed a whole movie setting up Dracula, showing us how evil he is and making him the king of the monsters. So that way we would know how big of a threat he is when Helsing has to face off with him. So basically, you would have a hero who had been getting built up from one movie to the next, having to go up against the guy who had an entire movie to show us what a threat he could be. And I'm going with James Wan because he kicked off the current big horror shared universe with the Conjuring film, so he actually understands this concept that we're going for, but he also worked on Fast and the Furious, so he knows how to do action as well, which, yes, horror movies shouldn't be action movies, I have already said that, but if any of them should be a merger of the two, it should be the one about the monster hunter, so I'm going to give this one a pass. Also, this would be the final film in wave 1 of these monster movies, meaning we'd have to look back at all the previous films and make some big crazy revelations about all the connections between them, and we would have to see how these connections would then lead into the next couple of films. And you know what other movie franchise was well known for doing that? Saw. You know who worked on all the Saw films? James Wan. And this would be another big point of the Hellsing film. As I said, we'd see him pop up here and there in these movies, but it wouldn't really be clear why, up until this film where all the pieces would be put into place. This would be when we see why he was investigating certain things in the previous movies, why he popped up in one location after another, and what the big mystery of all these creatures are. Why are these monsters all appearing? What is creating them? And the answer to that goes back to one simple question. We said that in this universe, Dracula would be the first vampire. So who turned him into a vampire? What dark evil was it that raised him from the dead as a creature of the night? How is this mysterious being connected to all the other monsters? What could possibly have existed this long to haunt man from the dawn of time? Who could be responsible for this?
Could it be Satan?
Okay, maybe not Satan exactly, but I think that after you cover the original Universal monsters, if you want to come up with something bigger than them, something older than them, something more evil than these monsters, then I think that going demonic makes the most sense. Give us something that has existed from the dawn of time and has always been there in the corner of man's eye, just waiting to create new nightmares to hunt him. However, at this point, I feel I need to stop because I know a lot of you are looking at me right now and saying, hey, you said that you were going smaller with these films, you said that you weren't going to have them be big, giant blockbusters, but that Dracula film and that Hellsing film totally sound like giant, big budget blockbuster films, especially with what you just pitched for Wave 2. Yes, I will admit, it does sound like I am getting out of control. However, this shared universe is not going to be like other shared universes where it just goes from one film to the next getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The only films in these franchises that are actually going to be big are the Dracula and the Hellsing ones, and those are the only films that will directly tie into each other. The rest of these films are going to feel more like side stories. Yes, the Hellsing movie will actually explain why all these monsters exist. However, you do not need to know that to watch the next couple of films. For example, in Wave 2, I would say we actually kick it off with The Mummy. And to watch The Mummy, you don't need to know where this dark magic that's reanimating the mummy comes from. However, if you watch the Hellsing film, it would give you an extra layer of understanding to enjoy the film. But let me just say to anybody out there who still thinks that making Dracula the big main antagonist of this first wave of movies and having a whole film focusing on him and having this lead into a Van Helsing film that would be a merger of action and horror only to set up something darker wouldn't work, well, let me just say that James Wan would be here to direct, but he would mostly be here just for his name, to get the fans of his other horror films in the seats. But I've always said the director is only part of the talent behind a movie. He's just one piece of the bigger picture. And for Van Helsing and Dracula, the rest of that picture would be provided by the man I'd pick to write both films, Warren Ellis, or as you might know him, the writer of Netflix's Castlevania series. I love this series and I think it perfectly captured exactly what I want to see in these two films. It was everything that a merger of horror and action should be. If you could take that same tone and style and use it for our two big guns of this franchise, I think you'd have a hit. In fact, I think Warren Ellis would be a great fit to oversee this entire universe. And as the success of the Marvel films have shown, a shared universe does better when you have a Kevin Feige at the helm, someone to oversee the big picture, and I could totally see Warren Ellis in that role, looking over the first wave of films and leading us into the next one. But speaking of these other films, as I said, there's still so many talented young filmmakers out there and so many monsters left to cover. So for the next wave, as I said, we would kick it off with The Mummy, and I would pick Neil Marshall to direct it, the director of The Descent and Dog Soldiers, because just look at what he did with a cave in The Descent, and then imagine translating that into an Egyptian tomb. Then imagine Mike Flanagan, who directed Hush, a movie about a woman being stalked by a killer that she couldn't hear, doing the Invisible Man movie, and Anna Lily Amanpour, who did the critically acclaimed A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and now taking that and putting it on The Bride of Frankenstein. There's still so many other great directors out there, and so many amazing monsters to cover, not to mention there's tons of places that you could go with the sequels to any of these films that actually pay off, but that's just how I would launch these films. Let me know in the comments down below what you want to see, how would you relaunch them, no wrong answers, this is all just spitballing, and as I said, this is the first in a new series where I pitch how to relaunch movies and shows. Heck, we might even do games from time to time, so let me know what you would like to see in the future. What's the next franchise you'd like to see me tackle? And you can always reach me on Twitter and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy, and make sure to share this video around the web. It's the best way to help our channel grow. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and a special thank you to everyone out there who followed us all throughout THORGIWEEN. It was 31 days of crazy videos, and I hope that every person out there enjoyed them. Make sure that you come back next time, and until next year, happy Halloween.